Imagine you're sitting down at a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
And before you even get a chance to look at the menu, your dinner literally swims right past your table.
Yeah, that is definitely a striking image for a lot of diners.
It really is. I mean, to a lot of people used to Western dining, seeing a giant glass tank of fish just sitting in the middle of a dining room looks like, well, a gimmick.
Right, or just some kind of aesthetic choice.
Exactly. But according to the rules of Chinese culinary culture, if that fish isn't actively swimming minutes before it hits your plate, its flavor has already been compromised.
It's fascinating because it forces you to completely, reevaluate what the word fresh actually means.
Because in so much of Western cooking, we treat the kitchen like a laboratory, right?
We really do. We take a raw ingredient, which we almost view as a blank canvas, and we apply these heavy techniques like smoking or multi-day marinades.
Heavy reductions. We're basically painting the flavor onto the food.
Exactly. But the philosophy we're diving into today argues the exact opposite. It says the absolute peak of flavor exists the very moment the ingredient is harvested.
Right. And the chef's main job is just to not ruin it.
Yeah, simply get out of the way of the natural flavor.
Which brings us to our source material for today's deep dive. And if you're listening and expecting us to pull apart some, high-end Michelin-starred cookbook, you're actually in for a surprise.
A very big surprise.
Yeah. Our source today literally opens with the phrase, "Welcome to Taste China, Learn English."
Which is just so cool.
It is. It's an English language learning guide. It's designed for ESL students, so the language is very clear and approachable. But its entire curriculum is built completely around navigating the world of Chinese seafood.
And, that format is exactly what makes this such a gold mine for us to analyze.
Because they have to explain everything from scratch.
Right. To teach the vocabulary of a culture's food, the authors couldn't just rely on assumed knowledge. They had to spell out all the unspoken rules.
The rules that govern this massive culinary tradition, stretching from the freezing, icy waters of Dalian in the north, all the way down to the tropical shores of Hainan.
Because over there, seafood isn't just a category on a menu. It is the absolute structural foundation of the diet.
So our mission for this deep dive is to extract those core rules. We want to look at the biology, the cooking techniques, and, the sociology of these dining experiences.
And we're going to keep it really accessible, focusing on why freshness means something so totally different when you refuse to compromise on it.
Right. And to do that, we have to start with that glass tank in the dining room.
The live tank.
Yeah. Because before we talk about knives or heat or, seasonings, we have to establish the absolute basic requirement of quality. And the rule from our source is uncompromising. The seafood must be live.
Not fresh frozen. Not resting on some beautiful bed of crushed ice. Live.
The guide talks about how common it is for restaurants to have these massive bubbling tanks of fish, crabs, and shrimp, and you, the customer, literally point to the specific animal you want to eat.
It's an incredibly direct connection to your food.
It is. But I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If you're listening to this and thinking, well, I buy flash frozen fish from the local grocery store and it tastes perfectly fine.
Sure, yeah.
You wouldn't be wrong. Flash freezing technology is amazing these days. So is demanding a live fish actually necessary for the flavor, or is it just like a high-end culinary theater for the customer?
Well, it is absolutely not theater. It's actually grounded in hard biological reality.
Okay, how so?
Because we aren't just talking about food that tastes fine. We're talking about hitting the absolute ceiling of flavor. Biologically speaking, the second a fish dies, its cellular chemistry starts to radically change.
Right, the clock starts ticking immediately.
Exactly. The energy molecules in its muscles, the ATP, they begin to break down into a compound called inosine monophosphate, or IMP.
And IMP is a crucial flavor compound, isn't it?
It is. It's a massive driver of that deep, savory flavor. But here's the catch. That IMP is highly unstable. Yeah. If the fish isn't cooked almost immediately, bacteria continue to break that IMP down into entirely different compounds. Most notably, one called trimethylamine.
Wait, trimethylamine? That's the chemical responsible for that really sharp, fishy odor, right?
Precisely. That pungent smell that most people associate with seafood.
Which means that fishy smell isn't actually the smell of fish.
Nope.
It's the smell of bacterial breakdown.
Exactly. It's degradation. So by keeping the fish swimming in a tank until literally minutes before cooking, the chef is stopping that biological clock.
Wow. So they're guaranteeing the meat is totally saturated with those sweet IMP compounds.
Right. And that zero trimethylamine has had time to form. It's the ultimate guarantee of quality. Because think about when you buy a fillet wrapped in plastic at the supermarket.
There's a lot you don't know.
Exactly. There's a huge layer of mystery. You don't know exactly when it was caught or how the temperature fluctuated on the delivery truck.
Or how many days it's just been sitting in that display case.
Right. The live tank completely eliminates all that supply chain mystery.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If a chef goes to the extreme logistical trouble of maintaining an aquarium in their dining room just to preserve those delicate proteins,
Yeah.
throwing that pristine fish into a deep fryer or like covering it in a heavy cream sauce would completely defeat the purpose, right?
Oh, absolutely. They need a cooking method that treats those proteins with total respect.
Which is why the dominant technique highlighted in our source material is steaming.
It's a brilliant method.
But the guide outlines a shockingly simple approach here. You just use hot vapor from boiling water, and you season it with nothing more than ginger, green onions, and a splash of light soy sauce.
That's the entire ingredient list.
That's it. Because the goal isn't to add new flavors. The goal is to unlock the flavor the live tank just works so hard to preserve.
Putting a heavy sugary glaze on a fish caught 10 minutes ago is like playing a beautiful acoustic guitar through a cheap distortion pedal.
That is a great analogy. You're just burying a complex natural frequency in a bunch of noise. But, I think a lot of people assume steaming is a bit passive or maybe plain. It doesn't have the aggressive sizzle of frying in a wok.
It's a common misconception. But scientifically, from a thermodynamic perspective, steaming is actually incredibly aggressive.
Really? How does that work?
Think about roasting a fish in an oven. Dry air is actually a really poor conductor of heat. But steam relies on the phase change of water.
Okay, I'm following.
When that hot vapor hits the cooler surface of the fish, it condenses back into liquid water. And when it does that, it releases a massive amount of heat energy directly into the food.
Oh, wow. So it transfers heat incredibly fast.
Yes, which means if you leave a delicate fish in a steamer for even 60 seconds too long, you aren't just slightly overcooking it.
You're turning those delicate proteins into rubber.
Exactly. And because you don't have a heavy crust or sauce to hide behind, any mistake in timing is completely obvious. It requires total precision.
But when they get it perfectly right, that heat maximizes the natural texture. And then those simple ingredients, the ginger and the scallion, they act to neutralize any leftover fishiness.
Paving the way for the real magic, which happens when you add the light soy sauce.
Yes. This is where we get into synergistic umami. A lot of people know umami as that deep, savory fifth taste.
Right, the meaty flavor.
But we aren't just talking about basic umami here. We're talking about a flavor reaction that literally multiplies.
Because white soy sauce is packed with glutamates, right, from the fermentation process.
Exactly. And the fresh fish is loaded with those inosinates from the breakdown of the ATP we mentioned earlier.
So when you combine glutamates from the soy with nosinates from the fish on your tongue, they don't just add together.
Right. 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 here.
No, they multiply. It's a proven culinary phenomenon. The flavor receptors in your mouth physically stay open longer when both of those compounds are present.
That is so wild. The soy sauce literally alters your tongue's ability to perceive the natural sweetness of the fish.
It's a masterclass in using food chemistry to elevate an ingredient without masking it.
It really is the peak of elegance. But, what makes this ESL guide so compelling is that it doesn't just focus on high-end refinement.
No, it explores a totally different, highly tactile side of the culture, too.
Yeah, we move from the pristine, quiet dining room to something much more chaotic. The world of shellfish.
Shrimp, crabs, clams, scallops.
Exactly. And there's this specific dish it highlights, garlic vermicelli scallops.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
It's scallops served on the half shell, buried in fragrant, sizzling garlic, and resting on a bed of really thin vermicelli noodles.
The structure of that dish is actually brilliant because when scallops cook, they release a ton of sweet, savory liquid.
Right. And if you just steam them on a flat plate, all that incredible juice would just pool at the bottom and get left behind.
But the vermicelli noodles act like a sponge.
Yes. They aren't just there as filler, they're a flavor capture mechanism. They soak up every single drop of the garlic and the scallop umami.
Transforming from plain starch into these intense flavor delivery vehicles.
Okay, now I'm getting hungry. But from there, the guide pivots to the absolute king of summer night food stalls. Spicy crawfish, or zhaalangxia.
And here, the focus completely shifts from the chemistry of the food to the physical act of eating it.
Because eating spicy crawfish is notoriously, gloriously messy.
So messy.
You get this massive bowl of small crustaceans, totally coated in bright red chili oils and spices.
There are no delicate forks or tweezers here. You have to physically tear the shells apart with your bare hands.
To get to the tiny morsel of meat inside. And this brings up a really interesting psychological point. In behavioral economics, there's this concept called the IKEA effect.
Like the furniture store.
Exactly. It's the principle that we assign a much higher value to things we have to put physical labor into building. Or in this case, taking apart.
Well, that makes total sense here.
Right. Think about how we normally eat today. We want ultimate convenience. Boneless, skinless, bite-sized nuggets.
Stuff we can mindlessly eat with one hand while we scroll on our phones with the other.
Exactly. We engineer all the friction out of our meals. But eating Zheolangxia puts that friction right back in.
You literally cannot touch your phone.
No. Your hands are dripping with spicy oil. You can't type an email. You are physically locked into the present moment by how messy the food is.
Because the friction isn't just a side effect of the meal. It's the whole point. Working for every bite drastically slows down how fast you eat.
You can't just inhale a bowl of crawfish in 5 minutes.
Right. It transforms eating from a basic biological necessity into a prolonged, highly engaging social event.
And because your hands are occupied, your mouth is free to talk. You're actually making eye contact with the people across the table.
The messiness is an incredible social lubricant. It totally levels the playing field.
Yeah, you can't be formal or pretentious when you have bright red chili oil running down your forearms.
Everyone is getting their hands dirty together. It's the culinary embodiment of a lively, loud summer night.
Which naturally brings us to the final environment our source explores. We've done the high-end tanks, we've done the night stalls.
Now we need to look at how locals shop for everyday ingredients.
The wet market. This is where that strict rule of freshness hits the streets. And the guide paints a picture that is so far removed from like a quiet, fluorescent-lit Western grocery aisle.
It's pure sensory overload.
Completely. It's an open-air marketplace selling fresh meat, vegetables, and tons of seafood. The air smells like salt. Water is constantly splashing from hundreds of shallow tanks holding live fish and crabs.
Vendors are shouting, haggling with grandmothers over prices. It's commerce in its most raw, unfiltered form.
You are right there with the ecosystem that feeds the city. But the detail that really stopped me in my tracks was the interactive dining loop.
Oh, this is fascinating.
You don't just go there to buy ingredients to take home. You can walk up to a vendor, haggle for a live crab splashing in a tub, buy it, and literally walk 10 steps to a small restaurant stall next door.
Right next door.
Yes. You hand your dripping bag of seafood to a chef standing over a roaring wok, and they cook the exact animal you just bought, right on the spot.
The supply chain is measured in footsteps.
Exactly. But it raises a really cool question about neurogastronomy. Does that chaotic, loud, splashing buying process actually change how the food tastes? Or is it just a fun novelty?
Oh, the science of flavor tells us it absolutely changes the taste.
Really?
Yeah. Flavor doesn't just happen on your taste buds, it's constructed in your brain. What you're describing is a perfect example of cognitive priming.
So your brain is getting ready for the food.
Exactly. When you walk through that market, your senses are bombarded. You hear the water, smell the ocean, you physically evaluate how lively the shrimp is before you pay.
So your brain literally starts eating before your mouth does?
Yes. You're psychologically investing in the meal. By the time that chef hands you a plate of sizzling garlic seafood, your anticipation is at its peak.
The chaos isn't a distraction, it's the appetizer.
Right. When food comes from a sterile plastic package, there's no narrative buildup. But the radical transparency of the wet market primes your neurological pathways to perceive the freshness and umami with way more intensity.
You aren't just a passive consumer at the end of some invisible industrial line. You are an active participant in the final stages of the ingredient's journey.
And that participation makes the flavor undeniably real.
So let's pull all these threads together, because the journey we just took through this English learning guide revealed a remarkably complex philosophy.
It really did.
We started with the hard biological reality of live freshness, how keeping a fish swimming stops ATP from degrading into that fishy trimethylamine.
Capturing the absolute peak of savory flavor.
Right. Then we looked at the thermodynamics of steaming, how that aggressive heat transfer paired with simple soy sauce creates synergistic umami that multiplies the flavor.
Elevating the ingredient without burying it.
Then we shifted to the sociological power of food. How the physical friction of eating messy, spicy crawfish forces us off our screens and creates a shared communal experience.
And finally, the sensory overload of the wet markets. How that chaotic, hyperlocal loop of buying live seafood and having it cooked on the spot uses cognitive priming to physically make the food taste better.
It really forces you to examine your own routines. For you listening right now, think about the last time you ate seafood.
Were you tasting the pristine biological reality of the ingredient? Or just a heavy sauce designed to mask a really long supply chain?
It's a lens that challenges everything we assume about modern dining.
It really is. And it leaves us with a provocative question to chew on. If the absolute peak of culinary authenticity and flavor requires you to personally pick a live animal from a chaotic, shouting, splashing market stall,
What exactly are we losing when we prioritize the quiet, sterile convenience of prepackaged, shrink-wrapped groceries?
we spent decades engineering the friction and the noise out of our food systems just for efficiency. But maybe we engineered the soul out of it too.
Wow, maybe true flavor doesn't live in a silent, perfectly controlled laboratory. Maybe it actually requires a bit of that vibrant, splashing chaos to really come alive.